and welcome once again to Bobcat Breakdown. It's our last episode before spring break, and we are in full playoff mode. We'll be talking about the women's ice hockey team's historic weekend, and women's basketball was on a mission for a repeat MAAC championship.
We'll also be talking men's hockey and their upcoming playoff run, and how did the men's basketball team fare in the MAAC tournament.
And of course, Kirby and I have our step up and sit down players of the week. Breakdown starts right now. Welcome to the most Boston episode, as we have Kirby Paulson here for Bobcat Breakdown. We start today with the women's ice hockey team. For the first time in program history, Hamden was host of the ECAC championship. Playing on home ice, the Bobcats defeated St. Lawrence in the semifinals, and they moved on to Clarkson in the championship game, beating Clarkson 1-0 to clinch their first championship in program history. Kirby, we were both there for all three of the games this weekend. What are your main takeaways?
Well, I think something important to think about is, especially in the Clarkson game in the championship, Clarkson plays a very defensively oriented game, but they're very aggressive and physical in your face almost. So it was important for the Bobcats to go in with the same amount of energy that they had gone in while playing them earlier in the season. I think they really matched their intensity very well. At the same time, I think the forwards were able to get enough creative opportunities, as Clarkson had been taking away the slot, which is a main shooting area for Quinnipiac itself. So getting creative and taking shots from different angles definitely helped them get a few more opportunities on the board. In terms of St. Lawrence, I think what we really saw was that in playoff hockey, anything could happen. We walked into that third period not really sure what was going to happen next. Of course, Randy Marcone ended up scoring the game winner with just over 5 minutes left. At the same time, though, you never really know what's going to happen, and I think we saw a Bobcats team that was willing to go out there and put their heart and soul into it until the final buzzer.
Yeah, with the St. Lawrence game in particular, they had to get offense from people that you wouldn't expect them to get offense from. Emma Greco got a goal. It deflected off of a defenseman's stick. And then Marcone got only her fourth goal of the year as a freshman. I think a lot of that had to do with just St. Lawrence at one point had 19 blocked shots when Quinnipiac had 19 shots on goal at the same time. Like, they blocked everything that game. St. Lawrence was just packing it in, throwing their bodies in front of the puck, just making sure the puck didn't even reach their goalie. And I think that definitely made it tough for them. The Clarkson game, both teams were just very hard set and blocking down the transition game.
Well, I think what we saw, and especially in both games, and you can make the comparison, is over the season we've seen a Bobcats team that comes out here and takes 55-plus shots a game, and that's something we almost expect heading up to the bank every weekend. Now we're seeing these teams that are so defensively minded, they don't want to give them any of those opportunities. They're going to do anything to keep that puck away from the net. So I think the shots really made a difference.
Yeah, but in the ECAC, in the NCAA tournament, Clarkson is actually coming back here for a rematch in the first round of the NCAA tournament. Quinnipiac's going to be hosting. So what do you expect to see in this rematch game?
Well, I'm not necessarily sure that either team should necessarily change their game plan. They both came in with a strong mentality, and I think, honestly, it was one of the most even-matched hockey games that I've seen in a very long time. In the same respect, though, Quinnipiac's going to have to get creative if Clarkson's going to continue to take away the shooting slot. And when you think about it, you have so many opportunities coming from the slot area. If you can't get those opportunities, you have to be able to spread it out and open up your passing opportunities as well, kind of stretch out the offense a little bit. They're also going to have to match their intensity. Clarkson's going to be skating like bats out of hell, and I really think that they're going to be, right from the start of the face-off, they're going to be coming in, throwing everything they possibly can on Sid Rossman. And in order to do that, you have to have the defense standing tall and almost build like a Donald Trump wall out in front of it.
Yeah, I do think, though, that it's a good thing for Rossman to see more shots. Because personally, I think she plays better when she's seeing more shots. In going back to the RPI series, that best-of-3 series, she only saw like 14 shots in the 2 games combined. And she gave up a couple of goals in the first game. Yeah, they were breakaway goals, but it's tough when you've been sitting back there. You've only had like 1 shot on goal all game. It's the third period, and all of a sudden your team gives up a turnover, and someone's coming in on you on a breakaway. Like, there's not really much you can do. You're cold. You don't know how to react. You haven't had a chance to see players' tendencies over the course of a game and kind of expect which way to go with it. And so personally, for me, I just think that it's good for Rossman to get more shots. It's going to be able to get her involved in the game, get her moved post-post. She played very well against Clarkson, seeing shots. And now let's move on to our next topic. Hypothetically, let's say Quinnipiac wins and advances in this rematch against Clarkson. They would face the winner of either Boston College or the Northeastern game in their region of the bracket at UNH for the Frozen Four. You have had an extensive knowledge of the Hockey East. You've been covering the women's Hockey East for a long time, all the way through high school. What do you expect to see, or, who do you think would be the best matchup for them of those two?
Well, the favorable matchup for Quinnipiac would be Northeastern. Northeastern struggled a little bit towards the end, down the stretch, with a couple of losses to BU, both in the regular season and in the semifinals, and they weren't able to advance over to the Hockey East Championship. The better matchup, entertainment-wise, is absolutely going to be Boston College, as they've been the undefeated team. They won Hockey East. At the same time, if Quinnipiac is going to play Boston College, I'm not so sure that Boston College has it, nailed down right down to the end. All the analysts are going to disagree with me, but what I've seen in the past is that Boston College has faltered in the tournament. I don't care what their record says. I don't care that they just won a conference championship. I'm looking at history here. I'm looking at the stats, and I can see that they're a very talented team, and don't get me wrong, I don't disagree with that, and I do think they have a shot at it. At the same time, I don't know if Boston College can do it.
Okay, and I'm going to just take your word on that one, because for me, I see 38-0-0. I see a team that's just on a tear. They got Alex Carpenter on that team. It's going to be very tough to beat that BC team. So I do agree with you that Northeastern would be a more favorable matchup. But BC, as you mentioned, does have a tough time when they get to this point of the year. So I'm just going to kind of defer to you on that one and your expertise.
The women's basketball team entered the playoffs with a bye. They went through Niagara and Monmouth en route to their third straight MAAC championship appearance. However, they would lose to Iona 41-57. James, the season begs to ask the question, does this team deserve an NCAA tournament berth despite the loss?
I think that there's a decent case to be made for it. They did get ranked within the top 25 mid-major polls the last couple of weeks of the regular season. But with the number of powerhouse teams that there are in basketball, and that tournament is huge. They allow so many teams in. I just don't think that they're going to go out of their way to let another mid-major, especially for the MAAC, to get in, maybe for another mid-major conference. But I don't see it with the MAAC personally.
Yeah, no, James, I'm going to have to agree with you there. It's tough, especially in the MAAC, to be able to – you really have to win your conference in order to stand out. Obviously, you'll get the auto bid at the same time. There's really almost no way in the MAAC that you'd be able to get a bid by doing so, because it's more of a weaker conference than some of the powerhouses that you just compared to.
Yeah, but going into that championship game with Iona, they had I think it was the 5th longest active winning streak in the country. They kept just pounding that into your head with the broadcast of that game. Like, the announcers just kept mentioning it. And when it seemed like Iona was just getting, like, expanding their lead, about to break it, they just kept mentioning it over and over. But I just don't think that they're going to go out of their way to enter another MAAC team into this.
Well, let's jump right into the championship game. Jim, do you think Monday's loss in the conference championship itself had more to do with inexperience or some of the major players being out with injuries?
I think it was a little bit of both. Napolitano being out was huge, because as a vocal leader on that team and a veteran on the team, a senior, she definitely was able to kind of help when players were not maybe at their best or struggling with a certain player in a timeout in the huddle, being able to just kind of calm them down, give them pointers, say that we can run these types of plays, or we can kick the ball out here. Like, just be looking and constantly keeping them, like, alert and focused on what else was there. So Napolitano, I think, was a huge loss, both in terms of the scoreboard, but also kind of that mental aspect of the game. She just understands the game so well. But I do think that there were some inexperiences in there. I was talking to Q30 beat writer Josh Silverman before the show. He called it before the tournament. Aaron McClure was going to get a technical at some point in this tournament. He just expected it to be in a more meaningful time of a game than being down by 15 or 16 in the final minute of the championship game. But there was a lot of times when them being young and their inexperience kind of came out, and they were getting frustrated with maybe some of the calls that were going against them, but they were frustrated that they just couldn't put up the points they were used to doing during that 19-game win streak. And it was just, they got frustrated with themselves, and it allowed them to get into their head and kind of slow them down.
I'll agree with you in that not having Napolitano out there was a big difference, because without a perimeter shooter, all of a sudden Iona could spread out and kind of cover more of the other offensive shooters. I will disagree with you in that the inexperience thing does not do it for me. The injuries, I do believe, had a major difference in that Napolitano was out. Stratmane took an injury, tried to come back out, only ended up scoring 4 points. I think the injuries did have a major difference in the game itself, because without your players either at full strength or even on the court at all, it's not easy to go out there and win a conference championship against a tough Iona team. So, having their strength this year and looking at their season and their stats, what do you think the expectations for Quinnipiac playing in the conference in the future are?
I personally expect them to be a wagon. I expect them to just kind of roll through the MAAC. I mean, you could say they went 0-3 to start, and then they just got on a hot streak, but there's very few teams who just in the middle of a year figure it out and then just all of a sudden just stop losing. Like, you know what I mean? For them, it was growing pains as far as I was concerned. They were trying to figure out how to play together. There was a lot of freshmen on this team. They figured out how to play well with each other and what their key to go to was. Last year's senior class that graduated that went to 2 straight MAAC championships and won the NEC in their last year in the NEC for them, they were a perimeter shooting team. They lived and died by the 3. That's what they did. Jasmine Martin was the leader for them in that. They tried to play that way this year, and they just found out early on it wasn't working for them. And when they found out Erin McClure is a force down low, we need to work offense through her, open up space outside and go from the inside out, that's when they really started clicking. And I think that now they are going into next year understanding that. And so I just expect them to, with that knowledge, just roll through opponents.
And in combination with the knowledge, don't forget, I mean, you're not really losing a whole lot of seniors. You've got a lot of fantastic young talent that's going to be able to really take this team farther. And I agree with you. I do think there's going to be almost like a wagon, as you say.
Yeah. We're going to take a short break here, but when we come back, we preview the men's ice hockey playoff run, and we'll discuss the end of the men's basketball season. Stay with us. Breakdown will be right back.
Good evening and welcome to Sports Pause.
In the end, we're here to win a championship this year.
Jess Fontaine now has that. She's going to take a ripper off the post, but she's going to come back.
And my number one, hold your applause, Bobcats fans, is Quinnipiac.
All right, Victoria, you know what time it is. It's top 5 plays of the week.
My favorite time.
Welcome back to Bobcat Breakdown. We'll switch over to men's ice hockey now, as they will be in the heat of the playoff race starting this weekend. The Bobcats received a bye in the first round of the ECAC tournament and are set to face off with the Big Red of Cornell University in the quarterfinals. James, let's talk about this Big Red team, shall we? What are you expecting to see out of them when the two teams face off in Hamden?
I think that it's going to be a battle. As we know, Cornell is big. They like to recruit big players. They just like players 6'5" and over. It seems like the whole roster is just 6'5" guys. They like to take up that space on the ice, and it makes it really hard for those Quinnipiac players who are typically they recruit kind of smaller, faster, shiftier, skilled players to kind of work in that the less space than they normally would have with the number of like just ridiculous, huge players that they have on Cornell. But I think that Quinnipiac showed that they can play a full 60 minutes in that last weekend of the season. They had been struggling to do that for a couple of months, and they were letting that week after week number one ranking get to their head. You could tell in the press conferences, Rand was getting frustrated. Gardig was getting a little frustrated with his defense in front of him. Felt that they weren't playing a full, complete game until really the third period in a lot of those games. It just seemed like they were starting to get frustrated, and you were worried. This could go one way. They could come back home, get a good week of practice. They can figure it all out, or they could just start infighting. And they figured it out, I think, in that last weekend. So I think with a week off to get healthy, it's going to help them and really help them succeed against this Cornell team.
Yeah, absolutely. I got to agree with you. And back to what you were saying about the big guys, we'll go back to the first matchup back in November, and it was an absolute mess. Quinnipiac ends up winning that game 5-4, but on both sides, you got to combine 55 penalty minutes. That's a lot of penalties. Cornell scores 3 power play goals in the first period. That's not exactly looking good for special teams right there. Cornell, yeah, Quinnipiac, not so much. So I think the real key to the game for both teams, Quinnipiac in general, is staying disciplined and taking advantage of the special teams opportunities when you get them. That way you're at the same time padding whatever lead or non-lead you might have, and at the same time giving yourself a little bit of cushion room.
I do think, though, that they do have the players to play with, the physical with Cornell. Davidson seemed to get back to his game of using his physicality to create room for himself and his line mates. And I think that really helped them in that Yale game in particular. He didn't get on the board with a goal, but he definitely opened up space for some of his teammates to get on the board.
So, Jim, what do you think the keys to the Bobcats' success this weekend are going to be?
I think exactly what I was just mentioning. They need to play physical. Because Cornell's going to come in, they're going to try and intimidate them. They need to play physical. They need to play a smart physical. They can't get in the box. They can't be taking stupid roughing penalties for stuff after the whistle. They can't be like, I don't know, just playing a little too aggressive in the corners.
Yeah, definitely. I think matching the intensity that Cornell is going to bring in. They're a big physical team. They're definitely going to play in-your-face hockey. We've seen it before. Definitely matching their intensity and almost coming out with more energy to even skate by those big guys is almost going to give them the extra opportunity there, too.
Yeah, I think the defense is going to be huge for the offense, too, from the point. Because with Gillum, he is great at making the first stop. But with I think Quinnipiac's success against Gillum in the past has been get a shot off the pads and then get those smaller guys into those spaces in there for the rebound and put it in the open net. Travis St. Dennis, I think, is going to have a great series this weekend. He's been playing great all season long, been a great senior leader for this team as an assistant captain. I think that he's going to have a huge series this weekend because this is going to fit his style of game because he's not the biggest guy out there, but he definitely can play physical and fight and get to the front of the net. We've seen him do it so many times. He's going to really get on the board a couple of times for them.
So, Jim, with that, where do you think the Bobcats can improve when they dive into playoff action this weekend?
I think that they fixed a lot of what I thought they needed to improve going into that last weekend of the regular season, but they just can't let this week off, this bye week. It needs to be about focusing on them and not so much on just kind of relaxing and just like hanging out. And I mean, we don't go to the practices. We don't know what the practices were like. We don't know what they were particularly working on. But I also think that the power play was really hot early in the year, and it's kind of been cold in the latter half of the year. They haven't had a lot of they haven't had as much production from it as they did in the first half of the year. It seemed like in the first half of the year they were getting a goal every game from the power play. They're going to need to rely on that, as we say, if we expect them to play smart and Cornell to play physical and maybe get them a couple of power play opportunities. They need to put the puck in the net.
Well, I think without a conference play, especially in the first half of the year, they jump in with a little fire, get it going, get everybody excited. Once you get to conference play, it's not as easy. I mean, you've got big kids here. You got really good goaltending. Michael Gatti mentioned it last night. You have big goaltenders. You're really it's a similar style of play in the same way you never really know what's going to happen in the ECAC. I think there's a lot of uncertainty running into it in the beginning of the season anyway. So I think that had a lot to do with it.
Yeah, and if they do get past Cornell, what do you think that they would have to maybe adapt to going to the bigger ice in Lake Placid? Because they had some troubles with that last year.
Well, I don't necessarily think they're going to have as much trouble last year as they do this year. This year they have a couple of freshmen that really move the puck well. They can really spread it out. They've been doing a really good job this season of spreading the offense out. So I think that'll make a big difference when they get out to Placid if they can get there.
Okay, well, let's move on now from one team just starting their playoff run to one whose playoffs ended earlier than they would have hoped. The men's basketball team needed to beat Rider to get beyond the MAAC Tournament play-in round. They ultimately lost 57-60. Bobcats ended the season 6-14 in the MAAC and lost their last 3 games of the year, including the tournament loss. Kirby, based on your expectations for this team, what do you call this season a failure?
Well, it's kind of tough, and I'll tell you why, James. What do you really expect from this team? As a team that's struggled in the past, they haven't necessarily found their mark yet. They haven't made their mark, is what I should be saying. Throughout the season, in going to all these games, it never necessarily, I never felt like they necessarily had a set identity almost. They really weren't sure where their orientation was going to be, whether it was going to be offense or defense. At the same time, you could see the faces of the players that they knew they were struggling, and there wasn't much that they could really do about it at that point. It's tough because you come in and you're at somewhat of a disadvantage on the recruiting side, and at the same time, your offense isn't producing the way you would like it to. And don't forget, they really struggled shooting from the field. They had one of the worst field goal percentages in the league, if not the worst, in the MAAC conference. So that really plays a difference into how their success rate is going to be.
You saw in the preseason coaches poll, they were predicted to finish in the middle of the MAAC. They finished lower than that, but I think a big part of that was when Shays Daniels got hurt in the middle of the year, missed 6 games. They desperately missed his presence down low. When he came back, Coach Tom Moore was talking about it. That actually helped him in a way because it allowed Donovan Smith to get some time to kind of grow into playing big-time minutes down there, and allowed him to become a good presence off the bench. And those two worked really well as a tandem in the first month when he came back. And then Donovan Smith just started getting in foul trouble every single game, and it was just killing them because then it forced them to play maybe players farther down the bench than they would have hoped, and thought that when Shays gets back, we're going to be able to kind of get ourselves together and get on a roll, start climbing back up into the middle of the MAAC standings and get into a good place in time for the tournament. And it just ultimately didn't come together. But I do think that is important for next year, because I think that this year was more about them kind of figuring out who they are. They are a little bit younger team that were returning a lot of these guys. But let's move on to one of the people who won't be returning. After a high-profile transfer scandal, Gio McLean just played his first season as a Bobcat, originally committed to Oklahoma. There was a lot of high expectations for him. Do you think he lived up to the hype?
So yes and no. Yes and no, and I'll tell you why. I think for a player that had to go through that entire process, it can't be easy, and it can't be, there's no way it's fun knowing this is how you ended up here. At the same time, though he was the points per game leader on the average, I think it was about 12.9 points per game. At the same time, me personally, I was expecting a little more out of him, especially offensive production. You want someone like that to be a leader on the court and be able to basically translate your offensive talent to help out. And I think a lot of times we saw him struggle throughout games, and that didn't really translate with the rest of the team. So I think there were times when, and I'm not necessarily calling out in leadership. At the same time, though, I think I expected a lot more out of him production-wise.
Yeah, for me, I think that maybe it was a little bit of a mismarketing thing. He was there was a lot of expectations. He was originally committed to a major conference school. A lot of people thought, oh, so he must be supremely talented. He's going to come in, he's going to completely take over this team, change the program. And in reality, I think he came in, and he's more of a traditional point guard. He's more of a ball mover. He's going to drive to the basket, maybe hit 1 or 2 threes a game. So I think that from watching him over the season, we learned what his game really is. And I think we expected him to come in and kind of be someone who's just going to be able to put up points left and right. And that's just not his playing style. His style is to distribute the ball. And so I think maybe it was a mismarketing, not so much as him not living up to the hype thing. When we come back, we are going to go into our Step Up and Sit Down segment, as well as pick our games of the week. Stick with us. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Bobcat Breakdown. Let's get right into it with our picks for games to watch for this week. Kirby, what game do you think everyone should be on pins and needles to see?
Well, I think, we talked about earlier, I think the Quinnipiac Clarkson women's ice hockey first round of the NCAA tournament is going to be an absolute bomb burner. What we saw in the last couple of matchups with them, it's been a very tight matchup itself. It's been a defensive trench battle. Both teams are looking for ample opportunities. They're both used to getting so many shots on the board. That game that we saw the other day in the ECAC championship was one of the most entertaining college hockey games that I've personally seen myself, and I think it's going to be an absolutely spectacular matchup. We're going to see a lot of great goaltending, but the defense is going to be spectacular as well.
I completely agree with you on that one, but I want to go with the men's ice hockey Cornell series. Nothing like playoff series hockey. From one day to another, you just see the hate just grow between the players. And by the third game, they're all ready to just tear each other's heads off. And it's just so intense to watch. And you could just feel like something can just be a full line brawl at any moment. And it's going to be fantastic to see. And plus, these two teams match up very well physically. We were talking about it earlier. Quinnipiac had a huge come-from-behind win on the road at Cornell earlier this year to win 5-4. In overtime, and then they tied later in the game. Later in the season with their game here at Hamden, 2-2. I expect it to be a very physical, very closely contested game. But there's always the potential for the last time these two met in the playoffs. My freshman year, going back to 2013, there was a 10-1 game in that series, and then there was an overtime winner in double overtime game in Game 3. There's potential for a lot of swings game to game in this series.
Well, Jim, I think we got ourselves a bit of a rivalry starting up there between the Bobcats and the Big Red. And now let's move into our famous step-up, sit-down segment. James, who do you think really stepped up for their team this week?
I think Sydney Rossman. Sydney Rossman for the women's ice hockey team faced 20-plus shots in the first game, faced only 16 in the second game, but a lot of them were really tough shots from Clarkson. A lot of them in this one power play where she got a skate on a shot off a rebound that barely went off the post after that. And they ended up winning 1-0, and they were up 1-0 at that point. That was a huge play in the game for them to clinch the win for them. She won the best player for the tournament. Overall, I think, like I mentioned earlier, I think that if she's seeing more shots than 20-plus shots in the game, she's going to be doing really well for them upcoming this weekend.
So I'm going to switch over to baseball for my step-up player, and I'm going to go with Taylor Luciani, the starting pitcher for the baseball team. Got the win the other day at Virginia Tech. They got the 4-2 win. He gave up 2 runs in the first, but really settled down after that. Got 5 strikeouts. Only gave up 2 walks and 5 hits. He's hit the ground running off to the start of the 2016 campaign. In 2 stats, he's 2-0 with a 2.77 ERA. He's only given up 4 runs. Really stepped up for the baseball team, and I think with enough starting pitching and with solid performances like that, they really have a good chance at the MAAC tournament.
Yeah, mixing in some spring sports here.
Yeah,
I like it. They are getting underway, the baseball and softball team, playing all their tournaments down in the southern states before they come home for conference play. And for every player that performs well, there's one that left their game at home. Who do you think forgot their game this week?
Well, we talked about him a little before. Going to have to go with Giovanni McLean. For a guy that's averaging 12.9 points per game around there, and higher expectations for a player that really should be capable of helping to at least carry that team. I think it was 4 points in the first round in their game against Ryder, that didn't exactly help them.
Yeah, and I'm also going to go with the men's basketball team. I'm going to go with Donovan Smith. I was mentioning it earlier. He had a good little stretch when he was stepping in when Chase Daniels was hurt, and then he played a little well after that, being in that rotation with those two as kind of a tandem down low, and then he just started getting in foul trouble. He played only 16 minutes. He got 4 points, and he fouled out. How do you foul out in 16 minutes? I didn't know that was physically possible. Was he just going up and hacking every guy going in for a layup just because he felt like it? That's just ridiculous to me, to foul out that quick in a game. When you're in a game like that in a tournament setting, your team really needs you to step up there. And he just decided to take himself out of the game for whatever reason. But that's going to be it for our edition of Bobcat Breakdown. For more of our show, check out Q30television.com and theqbsn.com. And make sure to follow our show on Twitter at Bobcat Breakdown throughout the week for more Quinnipiac sports coverage.
Also, make sure to follow at Q30 Sports and at QBSN on Twitter, and like us on Facebook to cover anything you might have missed.
He's Kirby Paulson. I'm James Harrison. Have a great day, everybody.